Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is Coach's Corner. I'm here with Chad Hufford, and you're never going to guess where he's at because I'm trying to reach the globe with every conversation. Chad, where are you at today?
I am up here in Anchorage, Alaska, cold and snowy.
I totally love it. The only place I've not had a conversation or somebody with is in Hawaii, and I'm still trying to find somebody in Hawaii. So I am so honored to have this conversation with you. Plus, we're about to dive into something that I get to talk about a lot, but not in the context that we're going to talk about it right now, and that is agency. We are more influential over our own progress and our destination if we take ownership of it. Let's dive into this conversation. Where do you want to get started?
Well, I think what you said is critical. We often underestimate or overlook the areas of influence we have in our own life. What ends up happening, Keith, is we end up becoming spectators. A lot of times we live on the sidelines of our own life, waiting for permission, waiting for somebody to invite us into action. And sometimes that'll happen, but it doesn't usually. Usually we have to be the ones be willing to step forward, as Teddy Roosevelt said, step into the arena, get out of the sidelines, quit being a spectator, be willing to um, step into agency and start making decisions, acting on your future rather than acting on your future rather than reacting to the things around you.
I liked you just said sometimes we need to get permission to do something. And I do talk a lot about that because sometimes when we face obstacles, problems, or things that we've never faced before, we shy away from them. And it's often somebody else saying, hey, you can do this. How do we flip the coin on that and to say, I need to be more proactive in that coin flipping? I need to step into that, what you just said, and say, hey, what are the things I can do to make things different? How do we do that?
Well, there's something called imposter syndrome that I know you're familiar with, Keith, and it's this idea. It's that little voice. Uh, Stephen Pressfield calls it the resistance. It's that little voice telling you that you don't belong here, you shouldn't be doing this. There's too much up against you, or you need to study more, you need to plan more. One of the things I think that is important for people to remember, education is important. Don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
but execution is what changes lives. So you can always learn by doing, but you can never do by learning. We can't study more and expect results to start happening. We have to apply what we know, we have to execute. And there's going to be that little voice in the back of your head that says, Dr. Keith, you don't have enough information, you don't have enough resources, you don't have the right pedigree, you don't have the right background, nobody's going to listen to you. And that voice, I think, will always be with you. It'll always be with me. It doesn't say Dr. Keith, it says Chad. But um, we all have that, though. And it's those insecurities, the uncertainties. And like we said, it's stepping into that uncertainty. It's taking that leap. It's, a lot of us are standing on a high dive in our life. And it's not comfortable standing on the high dive. But we've got all these reasons not to jump. But we're standing at the edge of this platform. We feel like everybody's watching, and it's nerve-wracking, it's uncomfortable. To step off the high dive, that is the hardest part. Once we step off, you start making decisions. Okay, we're we're going now.
We're
Like
free
it's
falling. We sure are.
there's no turning back, and you make it work and you learn along the way. But sometimes just getting started and pushing back those feelings of imposter syndrome and focusing on what we can do instead of what we don't know.
Well, I like that you added the whole high diving thing because I'm afraid of heights. And so that would never be a situation. But to clarify the point, on the way down, once I hit bottom, I can get hurt. And so, metaphorically speaking, when we step into something new, we can get hurt emotionally, physically, spiritually. How do we break through that pain barrier to say, yeah, it didn't work this time, but next time when I execute, I've learned something so I could do it differently?
Well, there's always going to be risk. And the risk of not doing anything is usually greater than the risk of action. There's no such thing though as a risk-free decision. And deciding not to act, that is a decision. And all too often when I'm meeting with people and we're planning out their financial futures, a lot of times we're talking about goals, dreams, and desires. And a lot of times we're talking about regrets too. A lot of the regrets that I hear aren't what people did that didn't work out. It's what they didn't do. It's the things that they never tried that are looming in their mind and they're wondering the what ifs. So regret is a much, much more pain is temporary, regret can last forever. I'll just say it that way.
Okay. And I like
And
that. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, and there is certainly a risk. You know, you're starting a business, you're introducing a new product, you're hiring a new marketing agency, you are introducing yourself to a potential client, explain what your value is. There's always risk, like you said, emotionally, spiritually, hopefully not physically. Hopefully, you're not going to get beat up for, trying to promote your business. But there is a lot of times we experience emotional risks, sociological risks. What are people going to think of me? What if I trip and fall in front of everybody? But the risk of staying on the high dive and just standing there is much greater, of not getting anything done. And one of the things that's been really valuable to me in my life is my time in college as a biochemistry student. So I have a degree in biochemistry. I run a wealth management firm. Doesn't make a lot of sense. We probably don't have time to get into it today. But one thing that taught me is the importance of experimentation. And a lot of times we have a poor relationship with failure, Dr. Keith. And what I mean by that is we look at failure as final. We look at it as a sentence and not a season. And back when I was in college, we would have an hypothesis. We would have an idea or even a hope for how we wanted an experiment to play out. However, we went into that experiment knowing that there's probably going to be some surprises. There's probably some variables we didn't account for. And we went into it trusting the process, but not married to the outcome. We were willing to learn from what we didn't know. We were willing to be educated by the process, but it still required action. We still had to run the experiment. Now, we didn't run into it willy-nilly. We went into it with careful preparation, with a lot of knowledge, a lot of preparation, but we went into it realizing that it probably wouldn't go exactly the way we thought. We were going to learn from the process. And I think in life, and especially for people trying something new, whether it's something new in business or a new workout routine, a new diet, a new budget, whatever it is, we need to look at those things as experiments. And the only difference between experiments and failure is your willingness to learn from the process.
Well, let's take that one step further because I know people in my audience are in that space. They're in a space of transition because they don't like where their life is right now and they're trying to make something different happen. And more often than not only just be different, but make a real impact. And doing that, like you said, takes planning and strategy, but we don't know what that outcome is going to be. And we don't know if we're going to fail. Now, for me, that was all these conversations I'm having. So after COVID and the quarantine, I just started to tap on people's virtual door and say, hey, do you want to have a conversation? And at the start, it was scary because
Sure.
many people said, are you kidding me? But slowly, because COVID was what it was, people were being impacted and said, I needed to make a change. And it was those conversations very specifically that I was having. People wanted to make change and they were figuring things out along the way. They were doing exactly what you were saying. They were making execution steps and figuring out what works and taking ownership of that. Tell me how important that is for people who are in the space and not know what the outcome is going to be, but they got to do something.
And I think that's where it comes down to kind of reverse engineering. Where do you want the outcome to be? Just like we did these experiments, we would look at here's the outcome that we're hoping for. We reverse engineer that to set up the experiment, but we go into it with a willingness to learn. We may have to pivot. The outcome may not be what we expect. So we may have to go back to the drawing board, rework things, reanalyze things, try it again. And again, like I said earlier, failure is usually not final.
Right.
We have an opportunity to learn and reiterate and try again if we're willing to learn from the process. And that's the problem with a lot of people, especially business owners, is we try the same things over and over and over again and hope for different results.
Right.
And you meet people, they say like, oh, I've got 20 years of experience in the health industry. Then you get talking to them, you realize, no, you have 1 year of experience 20 times because you've never tried anything different. And you wonder why you're stuck. And an analogy I'll give you, Dr. Keith, is driving. Most people drive every single day, but they're probably not significantly better than they were 5 years ago. They have spent hours and hours and hours driving every single year. Malcolm Gladwell talks about 10,000 hours. Most people have driven way more than 10,000 hours, but they still aren't significantly better, not measurably more effective and efficient as a driver than they were 5 years ago. Why? Because they haven't tried anything new. They're driving the same routes in the same conditions. Before we started talking, I just mentioned that we got 3 feet of snow in the last few days up here. No, I don't live in an igloo, but we did lose power and it did get a little primitive for a little bit there. But what that did is it added a variable that we're not used to. Even though we live in Alaska, 3 feet of snow over a few days is still a lot. That type of challenge, that type of stress actually causes our skill sets as drivers to grow. Now, the tough thing with driving is when you challenge yourself, when you stretch yourself, that experiment can turn into an accident. That's why we're not better drivers, because the cost of pushing the limit is very, very high. So most of us never get better at driving. We get to a point of comfortable competency and then we stop and then we just maintain, we plateau. We're good enough and we stop there. But when it comes to business, when it comes to running our own lives, when it comes to making an impact, producing a better product and a service for the people around us, we have to be willing to push the envelope. And the risk is there. When we push the envelope, short-term failure, embarrassment, setbacks, all those things are very, very likely, sometimes even necessary outcomes, but we have to be willing to flirt with failure in order to progress. And the risk in that isn't wiping out in your vehicle, causing an accident, and being injured. It might be a little embarrassment. It might be your pride getting stung a little bit. It might be some financial loss that's incurred. But a lot of times we magnify the risk bigger than it is. And it's actually the fear of failure that is more problematic than the failure itself.
And that is so true. And so how does one create this model, this thinking model, or this mindset that we hear a lot that can help them overcome that fear of failure? Because that is one of the biggest hurdles that I see all the time in my conversations. I wanted to, but, or this was preventing me from. How do we change that mindset?
This is going to sound a little counterintuitive, Keith, but we need to get super clear about the outcome. What do we want to happen? If we run the experiment, what is the ideal result? We want to be clear and we want to be intentional about that, but we're not going to be married to that. We're not going to hold on too tightly. We're going to reverse engineer the process. This is what a win looks like. This is what the objective is. Reverse engineer it to attach my current actions to the future outcome. And then celebrate and reward the inputs, not being too attached to what the result is, but celebrating and rewarding the input. So I'll just give you an example. If I'm trying to lose weight, let's say, I need to lose 10 pounds before
Christmas.
Valentine's Day,
Okay.
whatever.
Valentine's Day.
I don't have complete control over that, but I do have a lot of agency. So what I can do is say, what are the inputs that will leverage that goal? I could cut out sweets. I could stop eating after 6 p.m. I could go to the gym a couple extra times a week. I could add some cardio after weight training days. I could, there's a lot of things I can do. And what I need to do is then celebrate those inputs. So, okay, I worked out an extra 20 minutes this week. Great. That's a win. Checkbox. I'm going to somehow reward that input. I'm going to celebrate my action, even though the outcome hasn't been achieved yet. That's okay. And what I'm doing is I'm forcing myself to have some milestones along the road to victory. And I'm not just waiting till I cross that finish line. That's not the victory. It's the process. It's the road to it. And my goal is to have that done by February 14th, let's say. But the most important thing is I'm heading the right direction. It's much better to lose 10 pounds eventually than to only have lost 6 or 7 pounds by February 14th and say, I'm a loser. I quit. I'm scrapping this and then go in a different direction. Okay. So I'm at 7 or 8 pounds at February 14th. I've still lost 7 or 8 pounds. I can celebrate that progress and I can celebrate those inputs along the way and continue to iterate and revise those inputs to make sure that they're aligned with the outcome that I'm wanting.
That is just amazing. And I hear people talk about, having gratitude or being grateful for the little things. And you're just telling us that each of those milestones should be, you need to celebrate because it reinforces the fact that you are actually moving towards your goal. And that psychologically is what we need to understand to help us take the next step, maybe that next risk or jump over the next hurdle. With the limited amount of time that we have left, please give our audience a gold nugget of wisdom to say, hey, I know you've got a goal out there, and I know it's tough to get started, but you can get started, and this is how. Please.
So do not underestimate small beginnings. Big changes start with small habits. And this goes back to what you just said about milestones, Keith. When we look at those milestones, we have to be willing to celebrate for two reasons. Number one, we need those little doses of motivation along the way, especially if we're trying to make a big impact. We're trying to make a big change in the world around us. That doesn't happen overnight. A lot of the so-called overnight successes were 20, 25 years in the making. It's just, we're talking about celebrating the work behind closed doors that nobody ever sees. They will celebrate you in the arena, but what they're doing is they're rewarding you for the work that you did in private. So we need to reward ourselves and celebrate for ourselves the work that we do in private, those small little victories along the way. No one push-up makes you fit. No $1 makes you wealthy. It's the accumulation of all those little things that build up over time. So we absolutely have to celebrate the milestones because also it fundamentally changes us. If my goal is all about losing 10 pounds, and I lose the 10 pounds, then what? What do I do? Do I just go back to normal and gain it all back? That's what most people do. But if I fundamentally change by celebrating the inputs, I become a different person. I become the person who puts my long-term health first, who sacrifices momentary pleasure for long-term security, for long-term fitness, for legacy even. And by the time I've lost that 10 pounds, I've developed a habit of doing the right things and celebrating those right things, regardless of what the temporary outcome is. And in that process, not only do I change my trajectory of health and fitness, I transform who I am as an individual. So I guess what I want to leave people with is the idea that what you do matters. Your choices, your behavior, your decisions, you are the biggest variable to your success. And you think about the recipe of your life, you are the main ingredient. Now, there's things that happen that are out of your control. I get that. But sometimes things happen to you. Sometimes they happen for you. A lot of times it's our perspective. But you as an individual, you hold the cards. You are the lever to your future. But we have to be willing to step into the arena of our lives, get off the sidelines, and start making an impact and take some risks.
Chad, that was the best way to end this conversation. Thank you for joining me on Coach's Corner. And for those of you who are watching and listening, I'll see you next time. Take care.